Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all again. My role today is to put the case for the strong parliament side of this debate. And the argument that I want to make to you all is that it's to all of our benefit for Parliament to play a strong role in our constitutional setup, potentially a stronger role than it's currently able to do. Good scrutiny by Parliament of government makes for good government. And just because government needs to be able to get things done, that doesn't mean it should be able to restrict the ability of backbench and opposition MPs to have their say. Now, Meg framed a number of questions and Stephen's just gone through some of those. I won't cover them all in detail. Question A was about how we find the right balance between Parliament being able to conduct scrutiny and bogging government down. Government undoubtedly has a big and complicated job to do, and it's not desirable for Parliament to be able to intervene in every decision because that really could slow things down. But we do need to ensure that Parliament has enough opportunity to scrutinise government, because better scrutiny makes for better government. If Parliament doesn't get the chance to ask the right questions, there's less chance that possible flaws in what government is planning to do and decisions it's planning to take will be identified, and there won't be a chance to rectify those flaws. And there's more chance that government will be able to avoid awkward questions about things that have already gone wrong if Parliament doesn't have enough time to conduct scrutiny. And if you can't ask those questions, then important lessons might not be learned for next time. And that's why I think question D is really important. Who should decide what Parliament gets to discuss? Now, it's not an exact analogy, and it may have come to mind because I have just moved house, but if the government has too much control over what Parliament can talk about and decide, it's a bit like you deciding to buy a house on the basis of the estate agent's particulars. But the person who's selling the house being able to control which bits of the house you can look at, whether or not a surveyor can come round, and what questions they'll answer about that house. You might feel in that situation that you haven't had the opportunity to ask everything you wanted to and to know everything about that house before you made the decision to buy it. And the extra information you might have found out through that process might not have stopped you wanting to buy the house, but it might, for example, have changed how much you were willing to pay for it. In the same way, parliamentarians might not want to oppose government policy decisions altogether, but they might want to suggest changes or highlight problems which their constituents raise with them that the government hadn't thought of. And it's not just government MPs that have the right to be heard. We all elect our MP in our own constituency. Some of those will be backbenchers, government backbenchers, some of them will be opposition MPs. They should all get the opportunity to express their views. And if government has too much control over what Parliament can ask about and discuss and decide, then there might not be the opportunity for those views to be heard. And then there's question B, about to what extent government should be able to legislate fully without full parliamentary oversight. And Stephen's rightly said that government can only make secondary legislation, the laws that get much less parliamentary scrutiny, using powers that Parliament itself has handed over at some point in time. Parliament has to have given those powers to government for it to be able to use them. But in recent decades, ministers have brought forward an increasing number of proposed laws where instead of setting out their policies and enabling Parliament to ask questions about those policies, they simply ask for powers to fill in the detail afterwards. And the reality is that when a bill like that starts going through Parliament, there's very little that MPs can do to force government to spell out policy detail in the primary legislation. So they don't really have much choice about whether to grant those powers, especially if the government has majority and can push the legislation through. So over time, government has accumulated more and more powers to make secondary legislation and has done more and more using secondary legislation. And in my view, too much is done without full parliamentary oversight. Just one final point on legitimacy. In our system, we elect MPs and the government is made up of a subset of those MPs. So the government's legitimacy, the reason we all think it's okay for it to make decisions on our behalf, comes from Parliament. If the government just wants to get on with governing and tell Parliament not to interfere, it's cutting itself off from the very body which gives it the legitimacy to govern in the first place. Meg's asked a set of further questions, and I'm sure we'll get into discussion about those. But my starting point on most of them is that in Westminster, our government has an unusually high degree of control over Parliament, and there are some real downsides to that. Thanks very much.